My sister and I had a tradition of visiting the old lighthouse every summer. We went one evening in late August of 2019. We were just walking the cliff path and enjoying the salt air. That year she was about to start her senior year, so I'd let her walk ahead as I photographed the gulls, or I'd be right on her heels when the wind picked up. Suddenly, I noticed a figure at the fence line where the path curved, and he didn't seem to be admiring the view, and honestly, not moving at all. It was more like he was positioned there on purpose, and it just kind of set off my senses. So I caught up to my sister and stayed directly beside her. She could tell something was off, looked at me quizzically but didn't verbally question me. I tried changing our pace but staying on the trail, but within moments he would be at the same bend, watching. I quietly told my sister to please not ask questions, but to please stay close no matter what. Surprisingly, she did so because ordinarily she was full of complaints. I decided I would cut inland toward the parking lot, and you guessed it, within a minute he had moved to intercept. I immediately turned back toward the lighthouse. Same thing. In a moment he was at the next overlook. I did this about 3 times, and each time he repositioned where we were. I was very nervous, but I was trying to stay calm, and I thought about flagging down the docent, but decided I didn't want to alarm my sister. At some point, I told her the basics and told her to understand no circumstances should she run ahead. So freaked out, I just decided we'd head to the lot and leave. Well, as soon as we started down the access road, the man began walking parallel on the other side of the wall, and it seemed as though it was because that path led to the same lot. The second we unlocked the doors, he climbed over. I told my sister to get in and lock her door immediately. She did so. I had a chance to look back, and yes, this man was approaching the rear of the car. We had time to start the engine before he reached the bumper. We lived 20 minutes inland, but I took the coastal highway home. I don't know what his intentions were, but it felt sinister. This past summer, my sister brought this up again, and it's been 5 years, and I still feel that cold drop when I think about it. Whatever he actually wanted, I hope to never be in this situation again. My junior year of college, I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner just off the interstate. It was one of those boxy, fluorescent-lit places with vinyl booths and a jukebox that played the same 40 songs on loop. The night crew was small, me, a cook named Jorge who stayed in the back, and whichever server drew the short straw. I handled the register and the coffee, which meant I spent most of my shifts standing behind the counter, refilling mugs and trying to stay awake. The regulars were mostly truckers and insomniacs, people who wanted eggs at 3:00 a.m. and didn't want to talk about why. I was good at reading the room, at knowing when to chat and when to just pour. The manager trusted me with the keys, with the safe, with the alarm code. He said I had a calming presence, that I didn't rattle easy. That was probably why he didn't think twice when he hired Eli. Eli started on a Tuesday. He was quiet, kept his head down, and had this habit of wiping down the same spot on the counter until the vinyl started to dull. He was older than the usual college kids we hired, maybe late 20s, with soft hands and a voice that never rose above a murmur. I trained him for 3 shifts, showing him where we kept the extra napkins, how to spot a fake 20 when to cut someone off. He asked a lot of questions, but they were practical, eager. He laughed at my jokes. By Friday, I was telling Jorge that Eli was working out fine. The trouble started on his second week. I noticed he was always clocking in exactly when I did, even though our schedules weren't supposed to align. He'd stand too close when I showed him something on the register, his shoulder brushing mine, his breath warm against my ear. He started bringing me things, a pack of gum from the gas station, a paperback he thought I'd like, a coffee from the place across the street, even though we sold coffee for $1. I thanked him and set them in my locker. I didn't want to be rude. He'd had a hard time, he mentioned once. Previous jobs hadn't worked out. People misunderstood him. Then the phone calls began. My landline would ring at odd hours, and when I answered, there'd be silence, then breathing, then a click. I didn't connect it to Eli at first. I thought it was a wrong number, a prank, the usual static of living alone in a cheap apartment. But one night at the diner, while I was restocking the sugar caddies, I mentioned the calls too. Jorge, Eli was wiping down the counter nearby, that same spot, over and over. He didn't look up, but his hands stopped moving. I should have noticed that. Eli started waiting for me in the parking lot after my shift, leaning against his car, saying he just wanted to make sure I got to my car safe. The interstate attracted some rough characters after all. I told him I appreciated it, but I was fine. He kept doing it. Then he started asking about my apartment, which floor I was on, if I had a fire escape. He knew I lived alone. I'd mentioned it once casually, weeks ago. He remembered everything I said. He quoted me back to myself, my own words in his mouth, and smiled like he was giving me a gift. The night it turned, I was closing alone. Jorge had called in sick and the manager couldn't find a replacement. Eli had volunteered to stay, said he didn't mind the overtime. I should have said no. I should have locked the door and turned off the sign. But I was tired and the thought of handling the rush by myself was overwhelming, so I said yes. For the first hour it was normal. A few truckers, a couple of teenagers laughing too loud in the corner booth. Eli moved through the space like he belonged there, refilling coffees, clearing plates. He was good at the job when he wanted to be. Around 2 a.m. the dining room emptied. I was counting the register, my back to the room, when I heard the click of the lock. I turned around. Eli was standing by the door, the key in his hand. My key, the one I kept on a lanyard in my apron. "Just keeping us safe," he said. His voice was the same soft murmur, but something had shifted in his face. The smile was still there, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. They were fixed on me, unblinking. I asked him to unlock the door. He tilted his head like he was considering it. Then he walked toward the counter, moving slow, deliberate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was me, walking into my apartment building. The timestamp in the corner was from 3 days ago. He set it on the counter and smoothed it flat with his palm. "You don't close your blinds," he said. "Third floor right, I can see your couch from the street. You read before bed. Last night it was something with a blue cover." My throat went dry. I looked at the door, at the phone on the wall behind the counter, at the fryer in the back. Too far. Everything was too far. I told him I was going to call the manager, that he needed to leave. He laughed, a sound like air escaping. "I just want to know you," he said. "Really know you, the way you know the regulars. You ask them about their wives, their roots, their dogs, but you never ask me anything. You never really see me." He came around the counter. I backed up until I hit the reach-in freezer. The metal was cold through my shirt. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that I could smell the diner grease in his hair, the mint on his breath. He reached out and touched my name tag, his finger tracing the letters. "Say my name," he whispered. "Not for a customer, for me." The jukebox switched songs, some tinny country ballad, and the sound startled him. His hand dropped. I used the moment to slide sideways, putting the counter between us again. I kept my eyes on him and moved toward the phone, one step then another. He watched me, that smile flickering, uncertain. "You don't have to be scared," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to be close, closer than this." I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called 911 and the operator's voice was a lifeline, solid and real. I kept my eyes on Eli while I spoke, told her my name, the address, that a coworker had locked me in and wouldn't let me leave. Eli didn't move. He just stood there, his head tilted, listening. When the siren started, distant but growing, he finally unlocked the door. He stepped outside into the parking lot, his hands raised, and sat down on the curb. He was still sitting there, perfectly calm, when the police arrived. They took him in for questioning. The manager came at 4 a.m., pale and stammering apologies. He drove me home, insisted on walking me to my door. I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch, the one Eli had watched from the street, and stared at the blinds, which I had closed and triple-checked. Every car that passed on the interstate sounded like it was slowing down. Eli was fired, obviously. The manager said they were pressing charges, trespassing at least, maybe stalking. But when I called the station the next day to ask about the case, they told me he'd been released. His record was clean, they said. No priors. He'd seemed cooperative, remorseful. He told them he was just confused, that he'd misread signals. They said I could file for a restraining order, but it would be my word against his, and technically he hadn't touched me. I quit the diner the following week. I couldn't walk past that counter without seeing him standing there, tracing my name. I moved to a new apartment across town, second floor, blinds always drawn. But sometimes when I'm coming home late, I'll see a car idling at the end of my street, headlights off, and my chest tightens until it pulls away. I never get a good look at the driver. I tell myself it's nothing. I tell myself he's moved on, found a new job, a new person to know. But I still check my locks twice. I still wake up at 3 a.m., listening for the sound of breathing on the other end of a silent phone. This is going to sound like I'm losing my mind, but I need to get it down while the details are still sharp. I'm 24, working remotely as a sound engineer from a converted loft in a converted textile mill. The building's been renovated into apartments, but they kept the industrial bones: exposed brick, massive windows, original freight elevators. My unit is on the 4th floor corner position, with windows facing the adjacent building across a narrow alley. That's the only geography you need to know. 3 weeks ago, I started noticing something wrong with my monitors. Not the computer kind, the studio reference speakers I use for mixing. I kept hearing this faint rhythmic pulse underneath whatever I was working on. At first I thought it was a ground loop, electrical interference, something technical I could solve with better shielding or a different power outlet. I spent 2 days troubleshooting before I realized the sound wasn't coming through the speakers at all. It was coming from somewhere else in the building, bleeding through the walls just enough to register as subliminal pressure rather than audible tone. I started hearing it at the same time every night, 11:47 p.m. not approximately, exactly. I checked my phone, my computer clock, my microwave. 11:47. The pulse would last for 13 minutes then stop. I asked my neighbor across the hall, a retired piano teacher named Mrs. Voss, if she'd noticed anything strange. She said her hearing wasn't what it used to be, but her dog had started whining at the same time every night for the past month. She thought it was just aging canine anxiety. I recorded the sound on my phone. When I played it back, I noticed something my ears hadn't caught in real time. Underneath the pulse, there was a pattern, not random interference, deliberate intervals, then a pause, then variations. It was crude but unmistakable. Someone was sending Morse code through the building's infrastructure, using the old electrical system or the ventilation shafts as an amplifier. I don't know Morse code, so I ran the recording through translation software. The first message from 3 nights ago read, "Window 4th left." My window is the 4th from the left on this floor. I told myself it was coincidence, that the software was finding patterns in noise the way people see faces in clouds. But I stopped sitting at my desk after dark anyway, keeping my blinds drawn. Last Tuesday, I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart hammering. No sound had woken me. I just opened my eyes. The alley below was dark except for the security light outside the loading dock, and there was someone standing in it, not moving, looking up. I couldn't make out features, just the shape of a person wearing something with a hood. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, frozen, before stepping back from the window. When I looked again, they were gone. I reported it to building management. They said they'd review the alley cameras, but the angle is bad back there, mostly for show. They suggested I might have seen a homeless person seeking shelter or a delivery driver who got lost. I didn't mention the coded messages, didn't want to sound unhinged. But I kept recording. The messages changed. No blinds tonight. Then, listening. Then 3 nights ago, good ears. Whoever was sending these knew I was receiving them, knew I understood. Here's where it gets worse. I started researching the building's history, looking for any precedent for this kind of, I don't know, industrial haunting. The mill closed in 1987. Before that, it had been a major employer in the area, thousands of workers. But in the early 60s, there was an incident. A foreman named Arthur Coyle was discovered to have been living in the walls for 11 months after being fired. He'd built a hidden compartment between the 4th and 5th floors, running extension cords for power, tapping into steam pipes for heat. He was only found because another worker noticed tools disappearing and followed the pattern. Coyle wasn't violent when they found him, just confused. He'd been communicating with someone, the newspapers said, sending messages through the building systems. But he refused to say who, and no accomplice was ever identified. I found this in scanned newspaper archives. The article mentioned Coyle had a daughter. No name given, just that she was living abroad at the time of the incident. Yesterday, I came home from grocery shopping to find my apartment unlocked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved as far as I could tell. But on my desk, where I do my mixing, someone had placed a single object, a vintage microphone, the kind with the pill-shaped body and mesh grill, probably from the 1960s. It wasn't plugged in. When I picked it up to examine it, I realized it was warm, recently used. I haven't slept in my apartment since. I'm writing this from a hotel room across town, using my laptop, but I can still feel the pattern, not through walls now, through something else. When I close my eyes, I hear it. The software translated the last message I recorded before I left. It came through at 11:47 p.m., sharp. Just one word, repeated until the 13 minutes elapsed. Waiting. This was 12 years ago, when I was 17 and convinced I understood how the world worked. My father had taken a temporary consulting job in coastal Maine, and rather than leave me alone in our Phoenix apartment for 3 months, he arranged for me to stay with his old college roommate, a man named Hollies who maintained the automated lighthouse at Crescent Point. I resented the arrangement, immediately the isolation, the interruption of my summer, the implicit suggestion that I couldn't be trusted alone. Hollies lived in a compact cottage attached to the lighthouse tower, a structure built in 1892 that had been decommissioned from active service in the 1980s, but kept operational as a historical landmark. The cottage smelled perpetually of marine grease and old paper. Hollis himself was quiet to the point of opacity, a man in his 60s who moved through rooms with the economical precision of someone who had spent decades alone. What struck me immediately was his relationship with the lighthouse itself. Though the light was automated, requiring minimal intervention, Hollis climbed the spiral stairs to the lantern room every evening at dusk. When I asked why, he said simply that he liked to watch the mechanism engage. But he never invited me up, and the one time I started up those stairs unannounced, he appeared at the base so suddenly I nearly fell backward. He didn't shout. He just stood there until I retreated, then resumed whatever he'd been doing without explanation. The first week I noticed the radio. Hollis kept an old shortwave receiver in the kitchen, and every night at 11:40 I'd check my watch 3 times. He would turn it on and listen. Static mostly. Occasionally the muttered transmissions of fishing boats far offshore. But Hollis would sit motionless for exactly 23 minutes, then switch it off and go to bed. When I asked about the routine, he said he was monitoring weather patterns. At 17, I knew enough to recognize that fishing weather reports didn't broadcast at the same minute every night, but I said nothing. My father had raised me to believe that men deserved their rituals without interrogation. Then the boats started appearing. Not the working vessels that passed regularly through the channel, but small crafts, 16-footers with outboard motors, running without lights in the hour before dawn. The first time I happened to be awake, having failed to. Just to the Eastern time zone. I watched from my bedroom window as a boat cut across the dark water toward the lighthouse, then circled the point twice before disappearing. No one came ashore. The pattern repeated 3 nights later, then again 4 nights after that. The intervals were irregular enough to seem random, but the behavior was identical each time. Approach, circle, vanish. I mentioned it to Hollis over breakfast, describing the boat I'd seen. He buttered his toast with the same methodical movements he applied to everything, then said I must have dreamed it. I insisted I hadn't. He looked at me then, really looked, with an expression I couldn't read: assessment, perhaps, or calculation. The currents are tricky here, he said finally. Small boats get caught in eddies. What you're seeing is debris on predictable paths. I wanted to argue that debris didn't motor in circles, but something in his tone closed the subject more effectively than any command. The following week, I found the photographs. Hollis had asked me to retrieve a tool from the cottage's single closet, and behind the toolbox I discovered a shoebox filled with Polaroids. Hundreds of them, dating back to the early 1990s based on the fading timestamps. Each showed the same thing: the lighthouse at night, the beam cutting through darkness, and in the foreground small boats. The angles varied, the weather varied, but the boats were constant. Some photographs had dates written on the back in Hollis's precise handwriting. Others had names. I recognized one Michael Barr, my father's roommate during junior year, a man I'd heard mentioned in stories but never met. The date on that photograph was 3 months before my father told me Michael had died in a car accident. I returned the box to its place and said nothing. That night when Hollis made his 11:40 radio ritual, I watched from the hallway. He wasn't listening to weather reports. He was speaking into the microphone, his voice too low to carry, transmitting something to whoever waited on those frequencies. When he finished, he sat in the dark kitchen for a long time before noticing me. He didn't ask how long I'd been standing there. He simply said, "Your father doesn't know about the boats. It would be better if he didn't." I called my father the next morning. I didn't mention the photographs or the radio transmissions, just the boats, the circling pattern, the late hours. My father was silent for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. When he spoke, his voice had changed, flattened in a way I now recognize as deliberate control. "Hollis has certain arrangements," he said. "They don't concern you. Don't ask him about it again." I demanded to know what kind of arrangements required unlit boats and secret radio communications. My father said he'd call me back and hung up. He never did. I left Crescent Point 2 weeks early, claiming homesickness. Hollis drove me to the bus station without speaking. As we passed the lighthouse one final time, morning fog erasing its upper reaches, I saw a boat in the channel below, stationary, waiting. Hollis didn't slow down. He didn't look. My father died 4 years later. Among his papers, I found a single letter from Hollis dated 1989, before I was born. It mentioned a debt. It mentioned the deliveries. It mentioned my father's name in connection with something that happened in international waters, something that required witnesses to forget what they'd seen. The letter gave no specifics. It didn't need to. I understood then why my father had sent me to Hollis, that summer not as punishment or convenience, but as payment, some kind of installment on an obligation I would never fully comprehend. I still don't know what those boats carried, or who received the deliveries, or what happened to the people whose names appeared on those Polaroids. The lighthouse was sold to a historical preservation society in 2019. Holly's whereabouts are unknown. I tell myself there are logical explanations: smuggling, perhaps, or witness protection, or some government operation too mundane to warrant the mystery I've constructed around it. I don't believe in conspiracies any more than I believe in ghosts. But I check maritime news from the Maine coast compulsively, searching for reports of small boats found empty, or lighthouse keepers arrested, or decades-old crimes finally exposed. I find nothing. I suspect I never will.